Many people know that strangers can make life a living hell, but unfortunately, loved ones are also capable of this. Sometimes, cruelty and the desire to control everything lead to ruined destinies, even to deaths. John Edwards was born on July 12, 1950, in the small town of Broken Hill in Australia. As a child, he was abused by his alcoholic parents. At the age of 17, John stole his mother's car and ran away from home, leaving behind a short farewell letter. It was never possible to bring him back. He left almost all his belongings behind and no longer wanted to contact his family. He began working to earn his living, changing professions and fields several times until he became interested in an offer from the Australian Department of Defense. In June of the third year, he joined the famous Green Berets. John served in the Army until his 8th year, when he was finally transferred to the Army Reserve. His career had its ups and downs. He was involved in real missions and performed well. During his service, John had serious relationships with 5 women, resulting in 8 children. For privacy reasons, the names of most of these women are not mentioned. His first serious relationship was at the age of 18. In 1968, the couple married, and the marriage produced 2 children, a son and a daughter. The first wife described their life together as a normal marriage, but sometimes John was a bit arrogant. For example, he limited the amount of money she could spend and could become irritable on the spot. Despite these manipulative traits, his wife was satisfied with everything, at least until the 7th year of their marriage. Together with the children, they went on vacation to the United States of America. Some time after, the wife noticed that John was constantly corresponding with another woman he had met in Boston. The wife decided to end the marriage as she could not forgive the infidelity. John stayed with his lover in the United States. He wanted to keep his children with him, but the ex-wife did not allow this and took them with her. In the 7th year, he married for the 2nd time, this time with a woman from Boston. But they soon separated again because the wife was not satisfied with the man's aggressive behavior. John returned as a loner to his homeland, as he never had success. Therefore, he decided to contact his former wife. He tried to obtain custody of his children, but all he could achieve were weekend visits. Life experience taught John nothing. He remained the aggressor, and it seemed that his trip to the States only worsened the ex-military man's behavior. Gradually, the son and daughter became afraid of their father. His temper and relationship with his ex-wife deteriorated. John's behavior got out of control. Gradually, his children lost the desire to meet with their father because he was violent. But John believed that everything was his former wife's fault. In his opinion, it was the first wife who had caused such a rift in the relationships with the children. Therefore, he became angry and constantly called her, making threats. The man blamed everyone but himself for his ongoing life problems. His behavior towards the children did not improve. The son and daughter were very afraid of John and tried to avoid contact with their biological father at every opportunity. However, he insisted on the meetings. In 1977, John had a new girlfriend. The couple quickly began living together, and after 2 years of this relationship, a daughter was born. In 1984, they married. A son was born, but again, everything was unfavorable. During this time, John's third wife was severely harassed. His cruelty and aggressiveness became increasingly apparent. Even before the birth of their first son, she was pregnant, but her husband beat her so badly that she lost the child. John's outbursts of anger became increasingly frightening. He hit the woman, threw objects at her, and even threatened to set the shared house on fire while she slept. At the end of the 7th year, the situation became so unbearable that the woman decided to leave the tyrant. But she was afraid to say this directly. She feared her husband would kill her. She gathered the children and took the belongings she had prepared in advance. The woman waited until he took a shower one day. She thought this was the perfect opportunity to save herself and the children. She climbed over the fence with the children and, with the help of neighbors, notified the police. The man was arrested. In the meantime, the woman and the children had fled to the city and believed themselves safe. In fact, this report to law enforcement was by no means the first. The police had been dealing with this family for a long time, but John skillfully manipulated the victim, allowing him to evade responsibility and continue to oppress all those close to him. All of John's children spoke of the cruelty, the aggressive outbursts, and the moral pressure their father exerted. They were practically ignored by social services. John already had 2 daughters and 2 sons from 2 different women, and with both, he engaged in custody battles. Despite numerous allegations of abuse by his ex-wives and the children's reluctance to see their father, he managed to obtain permission to have contact with them. The sons and daughters were obliged to spend 3 evenings a week with their father, even though they obviously resisted. Social services remained inactive. The women claimed they had received threats and feared for the children's lives. Close family members confirmed that the man behaved inappropriately and aggressively, but the justice system ignored all these circumstances again. In December, the first wife finally obtained a restraining order against John. The reason was that he had unlawfully taken his daughter from school and then held her against her will for several days. Something similar had happened to the son before, but the police believed that the biological father had done nothing wrong. He had only tried to build a relationship with the children in this way. Eventually, the first wife managed to completely sever communication with the inappropriate man. At this point, his first daughter was 11 years old, so she could decide for herself whether she wanted to maintain contact with her father. As expected, she broke off all contact with him and simply ignored all his attempts to reach her. After the restraining order was obtained, the family breathed a sigh of relief. The third ex-wife, however, continued to feel under pressure and had no way to protect herself from her ex-husband. In the meantime, John did not miss any opportunities to build his private life. The man began a relationship with a 21-year-old woman. In 1999, she gave birth to a son from this cruel manipulator. By this time, their relationship had long ended. It seemed she could thereby escape the problems of other women, but she was mistaken. He began to harass her and claimed he wanted to maintain a relationship with his child. After some time, the young woman again succumbed to the manipulator's influence and resumed close contact. John promised to make amends. Of course, these were all standard manipulation tricks. Meanwhile, he had become very cruel and aggressive again. So the next victim of the sadist quickly recognized her mistake. The new woman and the son moved in with John and then moved out again. Living with a tyrant led to great stress. She became very thin and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but she finally managed to pull herself together and eventually left with her child in her arms. The woman turned to the police in hopes of obtaining protection. With the support of foundations, she managed to get a house into which she moved with her child and hid from John. As with the previous women, this did not stop the tyrant. He found out where she lived, kept coming by, tried to break down the door, and threatened her. With difficulty, John tried several times to kidnap her son. Eventually, he forced the woman to grant him joint custody, so the boy regularly went to his father's house, where the 2 children of his third wife also appeared. When the children grew up, they decided first to break off the relationship with their father. In 1999, the tireless John married again. As a skilled manipulator, he knew how to charm women and surround them with care and love. At that time, none of them recognized the true nature of the cunning man. His new wife became pregnant. This time, John's behavior changed dramatically, but not for the better. He asked her to terminate the pregnancy, but the wife did not obey. This threw the man into a frenzy. He provoked another conflict, attacked the woman, pushed her down the stairs, and beat her for a long time with his hands and feet. Apparently, the perpetrator wanted to get rid of the child himself in this way. The woman claimed that with each blow, he tried to hit her stomach. Despite his efforts, she managed to defend herself, and the baby survived. After the birth, John's next wife ran away and stayed in women's shelters, so her husband could not reach her. Nevertheless, he managed to find her and organize meetings. Over the course of a year, he constantly threatened her, demanded she return, and announced he would kidnap the child. And so the next victim of the manipulator went to court to obtain a divorce and sole custody of the child. The proceedings were concluded in her favor in September 2002. Unfortunately, in 2008, this woman by John was diagnosed with an incurable disease. By September, she had already passed away. Thus, John was granted custody of his 8-year-old son. By this time, the man already had 6 children from 4 different women, each of whose lives he had ruined. But John Edwards was not ready to stop there. In October 2000, the 50-year-old John met the 19-year-old Olga from Russia on a dating website. He was very nice and courteous, she said, showered her with compliments, and told her how beautiful life was in his homeland. So their romance began. At his invitation, Olga followed to Australia and decided to get to know John. In August 2001, she immediately moved in with him, and on November 10th, they married. Their son Jack was born in September 2002 and daughter Jennifer in August 2004. The children Jack and Jennifer lived with their parents in their house in the suburb of Pennant Hills in Sydney. It was a quiet, cozy area with much natural beauty and a close-knit local community. In the relationship with his young wife, there was nothing new. John was just as abusive towards Olga as he had been towards his previous wives and tried to control her every move. Unlike the other victims, the Russian immigrant had no way to defend herself. She could not run anywhere or turn to anyone. The circumstances forced Olga to tolerate and smooth over every angle as best she could. At the slightest disobedience, John threatened to take the children away from her and deport her back to Russia. Of course, the woman was in a very vulnerable position and was afraid of losing her children, so she endured everything. The man took control of the financial area, including his wife's salary, controlled the money, and began to dictate what she should wear and how she should look. He liked to exert moral pressure on her and bring her to tears. The manipulator provoked situations in which the young woman was ready to apologize for everything in tears as long as the abuse stopped. Olga and John's son, Jack, was headstrong but kind and free-spirited, a lively boy who loved sports and computer games. Despite his firm outlook on life, he was friendly and got along with everyone around him. When choosing his friends, Jack was selective, but for his loved ones, he was ready for anything, which he repeatedly demonstrated in life. His sister Jennifer was more reserved and quieter than her older brother. The girl spent hours reading books, loved animals, and ice skating. As Jennifer grew up, she had a dog named Max and a rabbit as pets. She spent hours playing with her pets. Riding the wave of love for little creatures, Jennifer dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, which she repeatedly told her family and at school. When their son Jack was about 10 years old, John began to exert moral pressure on his son, following exactly the same principle as with all his wives. Since the boy did not obey and only reluctantly complied with his father, he applied various sadistic techniques to inflict severe pain without leaving traces. For example, he broke his fingers with heavy objects. These abuses lasted for years and went so far that the boy lived in constant fear. He repeatedly tried to call the police, but his mother stopped him each time because she was afraid of losing her children. The boy began sleeping with a bat in his room. Only when he hid it under his pillow did he feel safe and could sleep. All the while, his sister Jennifer also witnessed these incidents. In 2015, she began sleeping with a knife under her pillow. It is hard to imagine an environment where children needed weapons to feel safe. During the same period, a family trip to Paris took place, during which there was a physical altercation between Jack and his father. The teenager ran out of the hotel, but his father caught up with him on the street and began beating him, pushing him against a wall and choking him. The situation got out of control, so much so that bystanders had to intervene. Afterwards, Jack wanted to call the police again, but his mother begged him not to. Again, the boy obeyed his mother. The incidents continued, and each time the man's outbursts of anger became more severe. Finally, in December 2015, Olga said she wanted to file for divorce. She could no longer tolerate such behavior. John began to apologize and begged her to stay, promising to change his behavior. The young woman gave him another chance, but in reality, things only got worse. In January 2016, the worried Olga turned to the police because her son had disappeared. Jack was reported missing. Only a few hours later, the police found him. It turned out that the teenager had run away from home and did not want to return, trying to save himself by doing the same thing John had once done to escape his family. Despite the obvious danger, the schoolboy was brought back to his family. The situation escalated further until the young woman finally made her final decision in March 2016. On March 11th, she left the city with the children and went to a neighboring town where she stayed with acquaintances. She was now aware of the tendency towards stalking that her husband had vividly demonstrated with her and his ex-wives. Olga feared his appearance in her life and asked them not to reveal her whereabouts. Nevertheless, John appeared on the doorstep of the house where his wife and children were hiding from him. In April 2016, the process between Olga and John began. The woman and her children applied for a restraining order against the father to protect themselves. John did not remain idle either. In the hearing, he reported the dangers the children were allegedly exposed to while they were with their mother without him. During this time, he also sought out a psychiatrist. He was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. However, the psychotherapist concluded that the man was generally fine. In his conclusion, he pointed to post-traumatic stress disorder. John used the whole situation to prove that he was working on himself and trying to cope with the consequences of the problems he had suffered. He referred to his difficult childhood. Olga lived in another city. The refugees were forced to move several times, so the tyrant could not find them. Nevertheless, the court decided that the son's residential address had to be communicated to the father, but it was temporarily decided that John should not come closer than 500 meters to Olga and the children. In reality, this played little role, as he kept following them and trying to make contact. Once, he came to Jennifer's school and tried to give her a dog, and later he met Jack at the train station and wanted to give him an apology letter. At the same time, John hired a private detective to keep an eye on his family. Later, the man allegedly ran into Olga by chance when he came to the studio where she was doing yoga. The incident occurred in February 2017. According to a confession he later made to the police, John regularly came to the fitness studio and worked out there. The staff believed he only came to the gym to ogle the women. He behaved strangely and inappropriately, which drew attention. The police ignored Olga's claim that he had violated the restraining order and simply believed John that it was an accident. In contrast, she insisted that the whole thing was a clear case of harassment, but it was as if she were not being heard. By October 2017, John had expanded his collection with 2 revolvers and a semi-automatic pistol. Then he went to the police station and claimed that people were wrongfully accusing him. In this way, he wanted to improve his chances of getting custody of his children, but it didn't help him. In February 2018, the court decided that Olga would have sole custody of the children and that they would not have to have contact with their father unless they wanted to. Naturally, neither Jack nor Jennifer showed any desire to have contact with their father. Olga and the children finally breathed a sigh of relief. They thought they had managed to pull themselves together, but in reality, the battle had just begun. On June 25, 2018, John Edwards rented a large limousine until July 7th and kept an eye on Olga and the children. He consulted a computer expert and deleted all information on his hard drive and in his browser. On July 4th, he retrieved the pistols from his gun cabinet. Apparently, he was very agitated as he closed the door so tightly that it jammed. A specialist was later required to open the lock. July 5, 2018, was a completely normal day for Olga and her children. She took them to school and then drove to work herself. That day, John left his friend Peter a large envelope labeled, "In case something happens to me." Additionally, there was a note stating that he should not open the envelope before a certain time. The friend obeyed. After the tragedy, Peter found several smaller envelopes inside with a will and letters, as well as $533 in cash. At 4:45 p.m., Jennifer got off the school bus and headed home. She was unaware that her father had followed her. Around 5 p.m., Jennifer's neighbor heard several loud bangs. He ran onto the porch and saw John coming out of the house. The neighbor tried to find out what had happened, but John simply got into his car without a word and drove away. The man knew about the problems the family had been struggling with for years. The neighbor opened the door and called out to the house's occupants, but no one answered. He notified the police. The police officers arrived at the house and went inside. They found 13-year-old Jennifer and 15-year-old Jack lifeless in the son's room under a computer desk. The children had been shot, probably trying to hide from the murderer. The police found Jack lying on Jennifer. It was the boy's last heroic act, trying to shield and save his little sister, which, however, he did not succeed in doing. Jack was shot 6 times in the back and chest. Most of the shots were fired from a distance. However, a contact wound was found on the boy's shoulder, indicating that the shot was fired with the muzzle pressed against his body. Jennifer suffered 16 gunshot wounds to the chest, abdomen, arms, and legs. At this point, Olga returned to the house, unaware of what had happened. Police cars were parked around the house, and a helicopter circled over the houses. She was told that her son and daughter were dead and that her ex-husband was being sought by the police. Olga immediately stated that the only person capable of such a thing was John Edwards. The police kept Olga's house under surveillance, believing she would be the man's 3rd victim who would return to her. However, he did not appear. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, the police arrived at the suspect's apartment. As it turned out, the 67-year-old John had returned home after the massacre of the children and shot himself in the head. His neighbor said that he went for a walk with his dog around 6 p.m. At that time, he heard a loud bang from the direction of Edward's house. Later, the man took the dog home because the animal was restless. When he returned to see what had happened, he saw a broken window and could no longer reach John. In the pocket of his clothing, a crumpled piece of paper was found with Jennifer's bus schedule, every day to and from school. In the garage, investigators found a toolbox with shredded documents, burnt pieces of paper, a destroyed tablet, and a mobile phone. 2 handguns were found in the house, which were used in the shootings of the children. The ballistic examination confirmed that these were the weapons used in the double murder. According to the investigations, the reason for the murder was the loss of custody. At this point, all of John's older children had already broken off contact with their father. All his previous wives had obtained restraining orders against him. John had lost control over his last wife, his son, and his daughter. This might have been the last chance for the manipulator. Having lost everything, he decided to kill his son and daughter. However, this was not a momentary impulse of madness. John carefully prepared for the act. First, he bought 3 rifles but quickly realized that they were too bulky to use inconspicuously for a murder. Then he bought pistols and revolvers. Next, he calculated the children's daily routines, school bus schedules, and Olga's work hours. He also entered numerous internet search terms. John deleted the information and destroyed everything he used. Obviously, he wanted to eliminate traces of the preparation for the crimes, down to the smallest details like the browser history. Some of the information was, however, recovered, but the bloody story was not yet over. Olga was devastated, emotionally shattered, and unable to cope with the loss of her children. Her mother realized that her daughter needed support and flew from Russia to her. Her mother gave her full support and tried to bring her back to life. But the woman could not stay in Australia for long. After 4 months, the mother had to return home. Olga refused to follow her mother and decided to stay in Australia. Despite her mother's pleas, Olga took her own life 5.5 months after the killing of her 2 children. During this time, she continued to live in the house where her ex-husband had shot her son and daughter and slept in her son's bed. Her body was found there by a neighbor. Close family members believe that Olga blamed herself for her children's death all along and took this desperate step. The heartbreaking story of Olga and her children became public knowledge. Residents asked legitimate questions. How could law enforcement allow this cruel tragedy despite numerous restraining orders? Why did the children, who were subjected to daily beatings and forced to sleep with weapons, have to go to such lengths to isolate themselves from their tyrannical father? And it didn't help them. The authorities completely ignored most of the allegations made by all of John's ex-wives, a man with obvious problems. How many women and children in this country must still suffer because law enforcement has failed to protect them from stalkers? The state police department conducted an internal investigation to find out which reasons played a decisive role and could have led to this terrible incident. All this happened under public pressure, fearing that they would try to cover up the incident. It was found that several law enforcement officers had acted negligently. They failed to record reports of harassment during yoga classes and attempts to have contact with children despite court orders. The man received no punishment for his systematic offenses. On the contrary, the ex-military seemed to find much more hearing than the victims of his tortures themselves. Even during the custody dispute, Olga encountered resistance. The lawyer, for example, did not consider John dangerous and completely ignored the existing restraining orders that all his ex-wives had applied for. After an investigation, proceedings were initiated regarding the behavior of the lawyer who was involved in the custody cases. For some reason, the defender ignored all the teenagers' claims that John had systematically morally abused them. The lawyer stated that he did not give weight to these statements because of their age. In reality, his behavior tied John's hands and helped the tyrant implement his criminal plans. The tragedy of Olga, Jack, and Jennifer has highlighted the vulnerability of the existing system in Australia and triggered a global reassessment of the care and social protection system. Efforts have begun to modernize the system, which could improve the response to domestic violence. Until now, the firearm registry was not linked to the list of offenders. This has become an urgent problem that should actually be solved, but the work is progressing slowly. So far, no global changes have been made in this direction. The relatives of the victims of this tragedy are striving for justice and the conviction of all those who acted negligently and made mistakes. Nevertheless, Olga's relatives have not achieved any success. John's ex-wives and Olga's parents are sure that the horrific massacre could have been prevented. Unfortunately, the system did not show the right interest in this situation. The negligence of social services and the police not only allowed John to take the lives of his 2 children, but also drove their mother to suicide. John Edwards will forever remain a tyrant who did not have the courage to leave this world without being held accountable for his actions. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.